I was starting to suspect that Steve Bannon might be out at the White House when he gave that interview to the American Prospect, to a liberal writer, Robert Kuttner, of Progressive Magazine. That's odd enough, but the fact that he kind of went off on some of his White House colleagues, weighed in on North Korea strategy, and said the kind of things that you would say off the record, made me think that maybe Bannon figured that this was almost like a swan song. He had some things he wanted to get off his chest, because this is a very media savvy guy. This is not, oh, gee, I forgot to say it was off the record. I think he wanted this out. He subsequently made similar points on the record to the New York Times and the Washington Post. And it turns out that it was 2 weeks earlier that Bannon sat down with the president and with John Kelly, the new chief of staff, and they mutually agreed that he would leave the White House. Now, I know from my reporting that Bannon never expected to be there, let's say, for 4 years, that he knew that the time would come, probably in the first year, when he would have outlived his usefulness. He's a fighter, he's a warrior, a very controversial figure. The press has never much liked this guy, viewing him as a dark and sinister voice, hanging him with every provocative thing ever published on Breitbart, his former website. And he, was painted as a kind of a white nationalist, when in reality, he at least views himself as an economic nationalist, a guy who wants to fight a trade war against China, pull out of the Paris climate deal. For all of the media misconceptions about how he pushed Trump in certain directions, the reality is Steve Bannon was most effective on issues where Donald Trump not only already agreed with him, but was saying some of these things for 30 years. About America getting taken to the cleaners by foreign countries and even our allies. And also there were times, again, contrary to his image, that Bannon had better political judgment than some of the other people working in the White House. For example, he did not think it would be a good idea to fire James Comey in the way and at the time that the president did, setting off a firestorm and ultimately leading to a special counsel's investigation. Now, some of this can be explained by palace intrigue. Bannon, who, as I said, is a fighter, clashed repeatedly, first with Reince Priebus, then with Jared Kushner. Now you're fighting with family, and more recently with Gary Cohn, the chief economic advisor, as well as with Henry McMaster, the national security advisor. And so you can only compile so many enemies in a tight-knit White House. But the thing is, if you talk about the media for a moment, Bannon was a guy who, even more than the president, just kind of despised the press. He was the one who said the media are the opposition party. They're not running against the Democrats, they're running against the media. He reinforced the president's instincts to stick it to what the president calls fake news. But more than just about anyone that I've ever talked to or covered here in Washington, he really was impervious to caring about his own media image. I mean, most of these people, whether they're talking on the record, off the record, on background, they do a lot of spinning. They want to make themselves look good, whether it's just for internal purposes or to run for some future office or you name it. Human nature, you want good things to be written about you. Bannon really didn't care. When Time magazine did a cover story on him, he didn't cooperate. He wouldn't even pose for a picture. They had to use an old picture. And he felt that the press was opposed to the administration's agenda, would never get a fair break from the press, and so he was very much of a proponent, and he didn't have to do much to convert Donald Trump, of going hard at the press and trying to go around the press rather than trying to play nice with the press. And he expected the kind of media opposition he got because he did view it as something of a war. Now that he is out, I think we will continue to hear his voice in loud terms. I think he always had a view of himself that he would fight for his causes inside the White House or outside the White House. It really didn't matter. He was happy to fight alongside the president for as long as he would last. Even Steve Bannon knew it probably wouldn't be as much as a year, and now that's happened. And the latest shakeup in the White House: Priebus gone, Spicer gone, Scaramucci gone, now Bannon gone, as John Kelly tries to remake and, in his view, perhaps impose more discipline on what has been a rather undisciplined White House.